Chapter 1. The Key Open. The metallic hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the sterile white corridors of Site-47, one of the SCP Foundation's most secure containment facilities. Armed guards patrolled the labyrinthine halls, their expressions hardened by years of vigilance. Behind sealed vaults and reinforced steel doors lay some of the world's most dangerous anomalies, each held in check by the sheer ingenuity of human engineering and an unwavering commitment to secrecy and legitimacy. At the heart of the facility, Dr. Eliza Greaves stood in front of a display case containing SCP-005. The object was almost laughably innocuous, a small brass skeleton key, worn and dull, as though it belonged in the pocket of a Victorian schoolteacher. Yet the unassuming artifact possessed the chilling ability to unlock any lock, regardless of complexity or security measures. Eliza adjusted her glasses, her gaze unwavering as she reviewed the anomaly's file. Reports of unusual incidents involving locked doors had been steadily increasing, sealed bank vaults inexplicably emptied, high-security prison cells mysteriously opened, and even airlocks on spacecraft suddenly found ajar. Each scene bore a common thread. SCP-005 had been spotted nearby, despite its supposedly secure containment at Site-47. "How does something like this keep leaving fingerprints where it shouldn't?" Eliza murmured, more to herself than to the guards stationed nearby. A security officer beside her shrugged. "If I knew that, Doc, I'd be wearing a lab coat, not armor." Eliza chuckled dryly, though her unease lingered. She turned back to her tablet, where a stream of raw data from SCP-005's containment cell appeared stable. Still, the unsettling incidents worldwide suggested something far beyond mere coincidence. Hours later, the hum of the facility was disrupted by a piercing klaxon. Eliza froze mid-step as red emergency lights began to strobe, painting the halls in alternating flashes of crimson and shadow. "Containment breach in Sectors 3 through 7. An automated voice blared through the intercom. "All personnel to lockdown stations." Eliza's heart raced as she turned to the nearest guard. "What breached containment?" she demanded. "Multiple SCPs," the guard replied, his face pale. "They're saying vaults are opening on their own. Systems are compromised." Eliza felt a chill creep down her spine. She instinctively knew this wasn't a coincidence. Grabbing a portable tablet from a nearby station, she accessed the surveillance feed. On the screen, several secured vault doors were ajar, their interiors disturbingly empty. Objects that should never see the light of day were now unaccounted for. In one frame, SCP-005 lay innocently on the floor, as though it had simply been dropped. "Play it back," she ordered, her voice trembling. The footage rewound, and Eliza's stomach churned. A shadowy figure, its form indistinct and shifting like smoke, reached for SCP-005. It seemed to pulse in its hand, glowing faintly before the figure inserted it into a vault door. The door swung open effortlessly, and the figure faded into the shadows. Eliza paused the footage, her finger hovering over the silhouette. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. Before she could dwell on the question, the facility shuddered violently. Distant crashes echoed through the halls, and screams filled the intercom as panicked personnel relayed their final, garbled messages. "Something's in the lower levels," a voice screamed. Oh God, it's huge! We can't—" The transmission cut off abruptly. Eliza felt the walls tremble, the vibrations resonating deep in her chest. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered erratically. She bolted for the nearest lockdown terminal, but the automated systems refused to respond. "Emergency lockdown compromised," the intercom voice intoned, eerily calm. "All doors opening." Eliza's eyes widened in horror as every door in the facility began to creak open, one after another. Vault doors, security gates, even emergency bulkheads meant to contain catastrophic breaches, all slid open as though obeying a silent command. A deep guttural roar echoed from the depths of the facility, shaking the floor beneath her feet. Eliza clutched the terminal for support, her mind racing. Whatever was stirring below wasn't just another SCP. It was something far worse. As Eliza looked down the now open corridor, shadows seemed to coil and writhe with a will of their own. A single thought dominated her mind. This isn't just a breach, it's a summoning. Chapter 2. Echoes Beyond the Threshold. The facility lay in a shroud of chaos. Alarms wailed intermittently, casting eerie flashes of red light down the now abandoned corridors. The air seemed heavier, oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing against the physical walls of reality itself. Dr. Eliza Greaves stood at the head of a small, hastily assembled security team, their breaths fogging the air despite the heat of the emergency lights. "Glucoms are down beyond sublevel 3, one of the guards muttered. "Whatever caused this breach, it's not just SCPs running loose." Eliza nodded, clutching the datapad with logs from the initial breach. The readings were erratic, almost nonsensical, with entire blocks of encrypted data replaced by symbols that seemed to twist on the screen. At the center of it all was SCP-5, which had inexplicably appeared at multiple breach sites without explanation. "We need to move," Eliza said firmly, her voice cutting through the palpable tension. "If SCP-5 is being manipulated, it's more than just a tool. It's the key to all of this, literally." The team descended deeper into the restricted sectors, where the facility's most dangerous SCPs were stored. The farther they went, the stranger things became. The corridors no longer followed logical layouts. Hallways looped back on themselves. Doors opened to blank walls, and distant sounds of footsteps and whispers echoed with no discernible source. Eliza's grip on her datapad tightened. The readings showed a rising energy field unlike anything she had encountered. Worse, the team began experiencing shared hallucinations. Images of twisting doorways, endless labyrinths, and shadows moving just beyond the edge of their lights. "What the hell is this?" one guard whispered, his voice trembling. "This wasn't here before. It's like the walls are alive." Eliza forced herself to focus. She recalled fragments of data from the Foundation archives, hints of SCP-5's deeper origins, legends of an ancient civilization, one that worshipped a being called the Gatekeeper. This entity, it was said, was imprisoned long ago, locked behind countless barriers to prevent it from consuming entire worlds. SCP-5, she realized, might not have been a tool for locking doors, but rather a relic of that civilization, a device tied intrinsically to the Gatekeeper's imprisonment. The team reached a sealed containment room, its reinforced door half open, warped as if something immense had pushed against it. Inside, the air shimmered with an unnatural haze. A researcher lay slumped against the far wall, unmoving, with SCP-5 clutched tightly in one hand. Strange carvings spiraled out from the researcher's position, etched into the walls, floor, and ceiling. The symbols pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. Eliza knelt beside the comatose figure, carefully prying SCP-5 from their grasp. The key felt unnaturally warm, vibrating faintly in her hand. She glanced back at the carvings, her eyes drawn to a recurring motif, a massive, many-limbed figure surrounded by concentric circles of locks. Her breath caught as the realization dawned. "It's not just unlocking doors," she murmured. "It's unlocking this. It's weakening the seals." The security team barely had time to process her words when a low, guttural rumble vibrated through the walls. The carvings began to glow brighter, and the air filled with a deep, resonant hum that seemed to bypass their ears and settle directly in their skulls. What's happening?" one of the guards shouted, panic rising in his voice. Eliza's eyes widened in horror. "It's a conduit! SCP-5 isn't just opening doors, it's breaking the barriers that keep the Gatekeeper imprisoned." Before Eliza could act, the humming intensified. The room seemed to warp, the walls folding into themselves. The distant sound of cracking stone and metal reverberated as if the entire facility was being unmade. Eliza clutched SCP-5 tighter, knowing they were out of time. From the farthest corner of the room, a shadow darker than the void itself began to stretch and expand, moving toward them with deliberate, malevolent intent. Chapter 3. The Gatekeeper Awakens. The air in the lower levels of the facility felt as if it had been drained of oxygen, replaced by something heavier, alien, and alive. The emergency lighting flickered in irregular intervals, casting jagged shadows along the metal walls. Eliza and the remaining team moved cautiously, their breaths shallow as they descended deeper into the labyrinthine structure. The hum of the Gatekeeper's influence vibrated in their bones, growing louder with every step. "This place doesn't make sense anymore," one of the guards muttered, his voice strained. "The floor plans, these corridors, shouldn't lead here." "It's not the facility that's changing," Eliza replied, gripping SCP-005 tightly. "It's the space around it. Reality is being rewritten." Locked doors, once impassable barriers, now acted as grotesque gateways. The first emerged with a bone-rattling shriek of metal, revealing a mass of slithering insectoid creatures with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like embers. The team opened fire, the staccato of gunfire reverberating as the creatures surged forward, claws raking against walls and flesh. "They're pouring in from everywhere," one of the guards shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "Keep moving," Eliza barked. "We have to reach the core containment chamber. It's the only chance we have to stop this." The creatures seemed endless, crawling from the shadows of rooms where the seals had failed. One of the guards, screaming in terror, broke rank and ran back toward the elevator. He didn't get far before a twisting black tendril lashed out from an open door, pulling him into the darkness. His screams cut off abruptly. As the survivors regrouped, Eliza's mind raced. SCP-005 wasn't just breaking physical locks, it was dismantling the metaphysical barriers that separated dimensions. She recalled the carvings and the recurring figure of the Gatekeeper surrounded by concentric seals. The seals weren't just physical constructs, they were conceptual prisons, locking away the entity's influence. "5 is a fail-safe," she said aloud, more to herself than to the team. "It was designed to lock away threats, but something's corrupted it. The Gatekeeper, it's using the key as a tool to break free." The team stopped at an abandoned security station. Eliza sifted through the scattered documents and data logs, hoping for answers. Among them she found an old report marked with the highest clearance levels. The file was incomplete, with entire sections redacted, but one line stood out. SCP-005, primary function, metaphysical containment failsafe. Warning, don't use in proximity to active dimensional rifts or anomalous resonances. The Gatekeeper's influence grew stronger as they approached the core. Paranoia and dread settled over the team like a thick fog. Shadows flickered unnaturally, and faint whispers that sounded like their own voices filled the air. "We're being hunted," one of the guards muttered, his wide eyes darting to the shadows. He raised his weapon, firing blindly at a non-existent enemy. Before anyone could stop him, he turned the barrel on himself, collapsing to the floor. Eliza and the last 2 remaining team members pressed on. Every step felt like wading through molasses as the walls warped and twisted, their surfaces pulsating faintly, almost organic in appearance. The hum of the Gatekeeper's power was deafening now, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to emanate from the core of their beings. When they finally reached the facility's core containment chamber, they were greeted by a sight that defied explanation. The massive, reinforced walls of the chamber had been reduced to a skeletal framework, twisted and corroded as though centuries had passed in mere hours. The containment field generators were silent, their lights flickering weakly. At the center of the room was a vast, pulsating black void. It seemed to ripple with malevolence, its surface stretching and undulating as if straining against the fabric of reality. Eliza could feel its pull, an almost magnetic force that drew her closer, promising knowledge, power, and destruction in equal measure. This is it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The Gatekeeper." The void shifted, and a fragment of its form emerged, an incomprehensible mass of limbs, eyes, and twisting shapes that defied human logic. It wasn't just entering their reality, it was rewriting it. "Dr. Greaves," one of the guards said, his voice barely audible. "What do we do?" Eliza stared at the void, SCP-5 still clenched in her hand. The key felt alive, vibrating against her palm, as if it were urging her to act. Before Eliza could respond, the void expanded violently, consuming the far side of the chamber. The Gatekeeper's form grew more defined, its many eyes focusing on her. The containment alarms wailed one last time before falling silent, and the lights flickered out, plunging them into utter darkness. Chapter 4. Locking the Abyss. The facility was unrecognizable. Once a fortress of precision and containment, it now resembled a living, writhing nightmare. Walls crumbled and reformed with grotesque organic textures. Stairwells spiraled into impossible directions, and the very air shimmered with instability. The Gatekeeper's presence was no longer a lurking threat. It was here, asserting its dominion over the physical and metaphysical alike. Eliza stood in the remains of the core containment chamber, SCP-5 still warm and trembling in her hand. Her remaining allies, Private Lang and Captain Monroe, looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination. "We can't fight this thing," Monroe said grimly, his weapon gripped tightly. "But we can buy time. What's the plan, Doc?" Eliza swallowed hard, her mind racing. "The Gatekeeper isn't fully here yet. It's using the breaches to tether itself to our reality. We can reverse it, but—" She glanced at SCP-5, its golden surface glowing faintly in the dim light. "We need to manually reactivate the containment locks across the facility. SCP-5 can seal them, but it's drawn to the Gatekeeper. It's going to resist." Lang stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Then we better move fast." Splitting up, Eliza mapped out a desperate course. 3 critical containment nodes, spread across the facility, had to be reactivated. Each was tied to the ancient mechanisms designed to stabilize the dimensional barriers. The team would split up to maximize their chances, even as the facility collapsed around them. Eliza and Monroe made their way to the first node, while Lang set off alone toward the second. The third, deep within the restricted archives, would be Eliza's final destination. As they moved, the environment seemed to conspire against them. Hallways stretched and narrowed. Doors slammed shut without warning, and distant roars echoed through the shifting architecture. When Eliza and Monroe reached the first node, a jagged tear in reality pulsed above the control console. Alien creatures spilled through, half-formed nightmares of limbs and eyes, their movements jerky and unnatural. Monroe held them off with his rifle as Eliza scrambled to use SCP-5. The key trembled violently in her hand, as if fighting her. For a moment, the Gatekeeper's voice echoed in her mind, a deep, resonant tone promising salvation and understanding. "Take me, Eliza. You've seen your kind falter. You could rise above them. All you need to do is open." With a scream of defiance, Eliza forced SCP-5 into the lock. The node hissed to life, glowing with an intense blue light that severed the tear, causing the creatures to collapse into ash. Monroe grinned, but his relief was short-lived. "Keep going, Doc," he said, his gaze fixed on the encroaching darkness. "I'll cover the next leg." The cost of resistance. Eliza pressed forward alone, SCP-5's resistance growing stronger. Her thoughts blurred, fragmented by the Gatekeeper's whispers. It showed her visions of power, endless knowledge, immortality, and the ability to rewrite the fabric of reality itself. Each promise came with a temptation to stop fighting. At the second node, Lang activated the controls, only to be overwhelmed by a massive eldritch creature, a towering mass of writhing tendrils and mouths. His screams over the comms jolted Eliza from her stupor, and she pushed herself forward, guilt gnawing at her. The Gatekeeper revealed. By the time Eliza reached the archives, the Gatekeeper's influence was suffocating. The final node lay in a cavernous room where reality itself seemed to bend. Above her, The Gatekeeper's partially manifested form loomed, a horrifying amalgam of shifting limbs, infinite eyes, and an aura of overwhelming dread. Its voice echoed directly in her mind, louder now, more insistent. "This is futile. The locks are weak. You cannot win." Eliza clutched SCP-5, its glow dimming as if it too were succumbing to the Gatekeeper's will. Her resolve faltered, her mind teetering on the edge of surrender. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the room. Monroe, bloodied and battered, stumbled into the chamber. "No time to doubt yourself, Doc," he shouted, opening fire on the Gatekeeper's looming form. His bullets did little to harm it, but they drew its attention, giving Eliza precious moments to reach the final lock. Monroe turned to her, his eyes steady. "Do what you need to do. I'll hold it off as long as I can." Alone at the final lock, Eliza reached the final node as Monroe's screams echoed behind her. She forced SCP-5 into the lock, her hands trembling. The mechanism resisted, sparks flying as the room shook violently. The Gatekeeper's voice filled her mind, now a cacophony of anger and despair. "You cannot imprison me. You will only delay the inevitable." With a final burst of strength, Eliza turned the key. The lock began to hum with energy, but she was alone now, with the Gatekeeper's full wrath bearing down upon her. Chapter 5. Sealed and Forgotten. Eliza stepped into the heart of the surreal nightmare. The containment chamber no longer resembled anything constructed by human hands. The walls stretched endlessly into a swirling void, illuminated by a dim, sickly light that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere. The air shimmered like heat waves, warping her vision, and a faint, otherworldly hum throbbed in her ears. In the center of it all stood the Gatekeeper, a towering, incomprehensible mass of limbs, eyes, and shifting geometry. Its form defied logic, as if the very act of looking at it was an affront to her sanity. The Gatekeeper turned its countless eyes toward her, its voice booming directly into her mind. "You think you can stop me, Eliza? You who failed to protect them, who let them die?" Assault of the mind. The Gatekeeper's words tore into her like claws. Visions of her past failures flooded her mind, her team members consumed by the creatures, her inability to prevent the breach, the lives lost because she wasn't fast enough, strong enough, or smart enough. The images twisted and distorted, becoming cruel exaggerations of the truth. "You brought this upon them," the Gatekeeper whispered, its tone mocking. "They trusted you, and you betrayed them." Eliza dropped to her knees, clutching SCP-5. The key felt impossibly heavy now, its surface glowing faintly as if resisting the Gatekeeper's presence. Her thoughts spiraled into despair, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her chest like an iron vice. Revelation of the key. Through the haze of despair, Eliza's gaze fell on SCP-5. For a moment, the Gatekeeper's influence faltered, and she saw the key clearly. Its surface shimmered with intricate carvings, symbols she hadn't noticed before. They seemed to shift and glow, as if alive, and in that instant, understanding flooded her mind. The key was more than a tool. It was a failsafe, designed not only to lock physical doors, but also to seal dimensional rifts. But there was a cost. The mechanism required a sacrifice, a life force to power the seal and restore the barriers. Eliza's hands trembled as the realization sank in. "That's why it resisted," she murmured. "It knows what it needs." The final choice. The Gatekeeper loomed closer, its form expanding and twisting, filling the space with an oppressive, suffocating presence. Eliza rose to her feet, SCP-5 in hand, and faced the entity. Her voice was steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "You're right," she said, her voice echoing in the void. "I failed them, but I won't fail now." The Gatekeeper roared, its countless mouths opening in unison. "You are nothing. You cannot defeat me. You cannot even save yourself." Eliza ignored the words, focusing on the glowing lock mechanism embedded in the ground. She stepped forward, raising SCP-5. The key's carvings flared brighter as it recognized her intent, its resistance fading. With a deep breath, Eliza plunged the key into the lock. A surge of energy erupted, coursing through her body and into the mechanism. Pain exploded in her chest as her life force was drained, the very essence of her being fueling the containment sequence. The Gatekeeper howled in fury as the dimensional rift began to close, its form collapsing inward. Collapse of the facility. The chambers shook violently as the seal activated. The void around her began to fracture, collapsing into itself. The Gatekeeper's presence faded, its roars turning into a distant echo. Eliza fell to her knees, her vision dimming, but a faint smile crossed her lips. "It's done," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As the facility crumbled into nothingness, Eliza's body disintegrated into glowing motes of light, merging with the seal and becoming a permanent part of the barrier. Aftermath and mystery. Weeks later, a recovery team combed through the ruins of the facility. Most of it had been swallowed by the collapsing dimensional rift, leaving only fragments of what had once been a sprawling complex. Among the debris they found SCP-005, untouched and pristine. The key was returned to containment, its surface now engraved with faint new symbols that no one could decipher. The event was classified under strict Level 5 clearance, and all records of the incident were redacted. Dr. Eliza Greaves' name was quietly removed from Foundation records, her sacrifice erased, but never forgotten by those who knew the truth. In a dimly lit research chamber, a young Foundation researcher picked up SCP-005 for further study. They turned it over in their hands, marveling at its simplicity. For a brief moment, as they examined its surface, faint, shadowy shapes flickered in the reflection of the key, twisting forms and countless eyes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The researcher frowned, then shrugged, placing the key back on the table. Deep within its golden surface, the Gatekeeper's faint whispers echoed, almost imperceptible. "This is not the end.